So tonight's topic, I have to be honest, is a little bit of a difficult one. Getting high, staying high. How can Judaism help us to stay happy and keep a positive mental attitude during lockdown? So, as you know, this series is based on questions that I was asked and wanted to address. But the truth is, when I sat down with this one, I thought to myself, hang on a minute, what have I got myself in for? And what I did to just begin with, actually, was I decided I would write down some of the challenges of lockdown. Now, we've all got our own challenges. I just tried to be kind of broad than the ones that came to my mind. So I started off with my list. Monotony, life is very boring. Children at home, that's a challenge, I think. Love my children, but it's still a challenge having them at home all the time. Tragedies, when unfortunately, we shouldn't know about it, but there's people that pass away, people that are unwell, restrictions on our lives, like restrictions that we've never known before, I think, in our lifetimes at least. Money, financial worries, job losses, anxiety, loneliness. And I'm looking at this list and I'm thinking to myself, hang on a minute, how is Judaism going to help with all of these? What am I going to tell everyone? Just be Jewish and then it will solve all of these. And I was thinking to myself, there's some, there's aspects, right, that some aspects that help with certain things. Shabbos, for example, can break up the monotony, right? Instead of every day of the week being the same. So we've got a Shabbat, and Shabbat feels different. You're almost transported to somewhere else when you're doing a Shabbat. So therefore, there are certain things, and the Jewish community obviously is helpful, very helpful with loneliness. Davening can help us with anxiety. There's lots of different aspects of Judaism that help. But really, I was looking for one answer. Einstein, lahavdil, that means, not that I'm claiming to be anything like him, but he looked at the end of his life, he looked for the one unified theory. Yeah, that was what he was searching for at the end of his life. And a teacher of mine said to me that it's always better to have one answer to 5 questions than it is to have 5 answers to one question. It's good to know, by the way, in life. Keep that in mind sometimes, yeah? But it's better to have 5 questions. One answer to 5 questions. It's better to have one answer to 5 questions. So, what is the single unified theory that can, I'm not going to say solve, because I think that's a very, very big word. But what can help us and make a difference, make all of these challenges easier for us to cope with and keep us positive during? And there's certain things which I think are universal. The things like counting our blessings, giving to others, those type of things, which definitely are found in lots of Jewish sources. Pirkei Avos mentions these type of things, and those are things which I would say are not unique to being Jewish, right? They're anyone and everyone can embrace those, and you'll find those sort of in many places, as well as in Judaism as well, though, obviously. So I was thinking to myself, what is the one thing that Judaism gives me which helps me with all of these things? And thank God I haven't experienced all of them, but the challenges that I have. And as I was thinking about it, look at all these words on the paper, you know what happened? There was one word that leapt out in my mind. And it leapt out in my mind. I've got it here, written in big capital letters. That word was purpose. That word was purpose. Because Judaism gives us a purpose. So I want to talk about purpose, 2 parts in the till 9 o'clock, and the short time that we have for this series. And the first part is generally speaking, how can purpose help us remain positive throughout all of our challenges? And then the second part, what does Judaism teach us specifically about our purpose? Okay, so let's begin. How can purpose help us to remain positive throughout all of our challenges? So the first thing is, beautiful story I came across, which just demonstrates what a difference having a purpose makes. You can have 2 people who are doing exactly the same thing. One of them has a purpose, and it's almost like he's doing a different task, doing something completely different. This was a story which was told, a little anecdote, which was told by Mark Zuckerberg. They invited him to speak at the Harvard graduation ceremony. He never actually completed his time in Harvard. He dropped out, and turns out he ended up being a lot more successful than most of the people who finished their courses in Harvard. And they invited him to speak at the Harvard graduation ceremony. And he tells the anecdote about when JFK went to visit the NASA Space Center. So in the 60s, obviously, the space race was full on, and America were determined to be the first person to land a man on the moon. And JFK goes and he's touring the NASA Space Center. And he comes across a janitor, or as we would say in English, a cleaner. And the guy's carrying a broom. JFK walks over to him and he says to him, "What are you doing?" And the janitor responds, "Mr. President, I'm helping put a man on the moon." This is just a beautiful thing. He's a cleaner, but he turns up every day to work because he is putting a man on the moon. What a difference that makes. The guy's got a purpose. He's got such an elevated purpose. It's like he's got a completely different job. The second thing is that if we have a purpose, then we see the opportunity in things. It helps us to see the opportunities because challenges block our vision. Let's be honest. What does the challenge do? Challenge narrows everything. We can see nothing beyond the challenge and the difficulty that we're experiencing at the present. But if we have a purpose, then we see everything in light of the purpose. So for example, if we've always wanted to change our habits, then the reality is that lockdown is the best opportunity that we've ever had in our lives because everything is changing anyway. So we've got the opportunity to change the habits that we've always wanted to change. If we've always wanted to learn things and we've never had time to learn them, then now we have the time. A lot of our time has been freed up. Our calendar has been freed up. Our social calendar for sure just doesn't exist anymore. Simchas no longer, all of this time. If we want more family time, how many times before the pandemic did we think, I wish I could spend more time with my family? And how many times did you hear people say that, right? And you get to the pandemic and my children are home all the time. I can't believe it. What am I meant to do with it? Right? But if you think about it, if we've got a purpose, if we're going more family time, we wanted that. Right? We've got it. Great. Brilliant. Now I can use it. I can do something with it. With Paro, is an amazing thing. Many of you might have heard this from me before. But Paro, when Moshe says to Paro, we've come to take out the Jewish people, right? Famous, let my people go. Paro's response immediately, he says in Hebrew, the pasuk says, Tichbad ha'avoda al hanoshim v'al yishu b'divrei sheker. Make the Jews work harder and they won't listen to this guy. And you think to yourself, 1 minute, that's really counterintuitive. He's come to free the Jewish people, right? He's come to take them out of slavery. And Paro says, oh, no problem. Just make the Jews work harder. And then they won't listen to him. And he wants to free them. You think to yourself, well, just a minute. He can make them work harder. They're going to want to leave even more. Of course they're going to listen. But it's very simple. It says the Mesilat Yesharim, one of the great ethical works in Judaism. He says it's very simple. He says, if you can preoccupy a person so much with the mundane things of everyday life, with the daily grind, then he won't be able to listen to the guy that says, I've come to free you, I've come to uplift you. They just won't have the headspace to listen. That was Paro. That was what Paro wanted to do to the Jewish people. So how many times in life are we just so preoccupied that we can't do any of the things that we want to do? If we've got purpose and we're focused and we've got that purpose that we want to do, then this, whether we like it or not, it's been forced upon us, but nevertheless, it gives us the opportunities. One of the things I've been thinking about this for a while. Did anyone think of using Zoom before lockdown? Right. It's existed for years. I don't know, maybe for a decade. I don't know how long, but maybe 5 years, 3 years. It's definitely been usable for a while. We've all had broadband and we've got computers with cameras on them. And we've been giving, talks such as these. No one thought of it. Why? Because we've just carried on. You just continue without thinking, doing the same things that you're doing. Now this has given us an opportunity and we're all thinking to ourselves, hang on a sec, I'm going to use Zoom more. I'm going to do this more often, this Zoom thing, right? I'd like to have more in person as well. Don't get me wrong. We're going to do a hybrid of it, right? Working at home, right? We're all going to be working at home more than we were before, if not completely for some people. Why? Because we've now realized we can do it, but we didn't think about it before. It wasn't an option before because we were just going. So when we have a purpose, then we can see the opportunity in everything that happens around us. It enables us to see more than just the present difficulty that we have. The third thing is why purpose helps us to remain positive is the following. The reality of this is different people are going through different things. For many people, there isn't anything life-threatening. Thank God, there isn't anything life-threatening. But the things that are making people depressed or feeling down and not able to cope are just sometimes that we can't do the normal mundane activities that we're used to, whether it's entertainment, whether it's going to restaurants or, even simchas, leisure, visiting friends, all of these type of things, right? Now, again, we have to realize that the more that we've got purpose in our lives, the more that we've got we've elevated our lives where we're to the point that this isn't all our lives contain. Life isn't just about what we do, but rather it's about the direction that we're going in. So then we can cope more with those things. I'm not saying it's not going to bother us. Trust me, it bothers every single one of us, me included, that I can't go places that I want to go to, and I can't see my friends when I want to see, and I can't see my loved ones in person, and my family, my parents, etc. But nevertheless, we can be able to cope if we understand that life is not just about the things that we do, but it's about where we are going. And I suppose that the person who is the father of the school of purposeful, meaningful life is, I would say, in recent psychology, is Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl famously was the founder of logotherapy. He came out of Auschwitz, and he says what kept him going in the Nazi concentration camps was that he wanted to write this book. He wanted to tell the world about logotherapy, about having a meaning to life. And that's what he saw when he was even in the concentration camps, that the people who were able to survive the experience were the ones who had a purpose, the ones who had a task that they needed to fulfill. So that's the first part. That's how purpose, generally speaking, purpose can help us to remain positive during all of our challenges. The second part is, what does Judaism teach us about purpose? What does Judaism teach us about purpose? So obviously, the first question that we've got to ask ourselves is, what is our purpose? Okay, and it's a hard question to ask, ourselves. What is our purpose? And Rabbi Twersky tells the story of two vagabonds. Rabbi Twersky should be well, actually, should have a refuah shalema. He's unfortunately, he's got coronavirus. He's had a shot of the vaccine though already, so hopefully, please God, he should be okay. Rabbi Twersky was a founder of the Gateway Rehabilitation Center, as well as being a rabbi. He is a world-famous psychiatrist as well. Anyway, he tells the story of two vagabonds who were picked up by the police, seemingly up to no good. And the policeman takes one of them and he says to him, "What were you doing?" So he says, "Nothing." He goes over to his friend and says, "You knew? What were you doing?" He said, "I was helping him." So he said, if you're helping someone who's got no purpose, then you've also got no purpose. So sometimes we think, oh, we'll do what everyone else does. You know, what are you doing? I'm doing what everyone else does. You know, I get up in the morning and I eat and I go to work. We all do that, right? But we have to realize, and it's obvious, isn't it? Right? Helping someone or following someone who has no purpose doesn't mean that you have a purpose. So what is our purpose? Now, we can make our own purpose, by the way, right? And it's quite easy to make your own purpose. I would suggest that there are some people whose purpose in life is to support a football team. I'm not putting anyone down for supporting football. I grew up supporting football teams, etc. I have to admit, I don't follow it as much now as I used to, but nevertheless, supporting a football team could be a purpose. But the reality of these things is, whether it's supporting a football team or it's our, rock climbing that we do, or it's our holidays, or all of these things can motivate us. These things can, give us some energy and give us some life. They're important, but are they really a purpose? Are they a purpose in our lives? And I think where this, by the way, the way this comes to the forefront is sometimes the things that we think are our purpose, or we act as if they are our purpose, they're the things that keep us going every day. When we come to something like a pandemic and we can't do those things anymore, and we really are sort of stifled in what we can do, then really those aren't enough. Those things aren't actually enough to keep us going. So the purposes which aren't a real purpose to life, although they can help us to motivate us, I would say those are more of an outlet than a purpose. And maybe that's why so many people find themselves so disorientated now during them. It's so hard to cope, because that thing that I was sure, subconsciously at least, gave meaning and purpose to my life just doesn't do it. It just doesn't, it's not enough to overcome this whole situation that we're living in. So the reality is, and it makes sense, that a true purpose has got to be something that we'd be willing to die for. Because if it's going to be a purpose for life, then it must be that it's something which is greater than life itself. Now, that's a big statement. That's a huge statement, right? Some of you were with me in the class on the 5 levels of pleasure, where Rabbi Noach Weinberg, he asks, what would a person be compelled? What would make a person compelled to actually give up their life and what they hold most dearly. He gives the example that terrorists take a plane hostage, they turn to you and they say, kill every single passenger on this plane or we're going to kill you and your children. Now, as much as people love themselves and their family and their children, I would venture to say that most people would not be able to kill a plane full of innocent people. Why? Because there's meaning in their life, because they understand that this is wrong. They understand they have a purpose and a goal to be a good person, and this goes against that. This goes against everything that they stand for. So a real purpose in life is something which is even greater and more powerful than life itself. Noach Weinberg says a line, a beautiful line. He says, if you don't know what you're willing to die for, then you haven't begun to live. So we need a real purpose, or what Viktor Frankl calls a super meaning. He's got meaning and a super meaning, okay? A meaning which transcends just our everyday and our usual existence. So to begin with, 2 Torah sources. The first one to begin with, actually, an interesting question. Has anyone ever thought about this? We make a bracha at Havdalah, okay? At Havdalah time, the end of Shabbat, we make a special bracha on a candle. The candle, the bracha that we make on the candle is Borei Me'orei Ha'esh. Blessed is the one who created the light of the fire. Now, 1 second. Has anyone ever made that blessing any time that they've seen a fire except on Motzei Shabbat? Anyone like walked around, you go up to a bonfire and start doing this with your hand, Borei, Borei. Yeah, they'd look at you like you were crazy, yeah? You've never seen anyone that got a light bulb, Borei, Borei, yeah? Okay, you might tell me a light bulb's not really fire, but, the Shabbos candles, right? Why do we only do that on Motzei Shabbat? Foods you make a bracha on all the time, right? Whenever you benefit from a food, there's a bracha to make before you eat the food. Even when you smell something, there's a bracha to make. Just like we make on the Besamim on Friday, on Motzei Shabbat. Every time you smell something beautiful, you walk past lavender and you take some and you smell it in order, you want to actually enjoy the smell of it. There's a bracha to make on it. But when it comes to a candle, when it comes to light, the only time we make the bracha on that is on Motzei Shabbat. And the Talmud, the Gemara explains that in fact, the bracha is not just on the benefit that we're getting from the light. We don't make a bracha on the benefit that we get from a light because we're not imbibing anything, taking it into our body. But rather it's the fact that the light was created on Motzei Shabbat. The very first time that light, that fire was created was after that very first Shabbat went out. Adam, the Medrash tells us that Adam HaRishon took 2 stones, rubbed them together, made a spark, and he made the very first fire. And therefore we make a bracha because that's when the fire was created. So making a bracha on the fire, not because we're enjoying and benefiting from it. We're praising God that fire was created on Motzei Shabbat. Now, 1 second. We all know there were 6 days of creation, okay? And then God rested. So hang on a minute. Now that you're telling me there was an 8th, because something actually wasn't created in the 6 days, right? It wasn't created on Shabbat either. He couldn't light the fire on Shabbat. So it was created on Motzei Shabbat. It's the 8th day of creation now. 1 second, That doesn't fit. It doesn't fit with all the songs. It doesn't fit with what we learned in school. It doesn't fit with anything. So in the Perish Maznaim La Torah, the commentary on the Torah, he says something very beautiful. Listen to this. Adam sinned. And he sinned because he ate from the tree of knowledge, which he wasn't meant to sin, which he wasn't meant to eat. He wanted to be like God. He wanted to create worlds, Rashi says. He wanted to be a creator. Just like there's a creator of the universe, he said, I also want to be a creator. He wanted to be like God. God says to him, no, that's wrong. That's not your place. So Adam is despondent. So he thinks to himself, why was I created, God? Why did you put me in the world then? If I'm not going to be like you, if I'm not going to be a creator, I can't create things like you can, then what did you put me in the world for? Motzei Shabbat, the very first time after that Shabbat goes out, God says to him, teaches him how to make fire. Take 2 things in this world, 2 physical objects, use them to make something new. It's not something which is created out of nothing like God can do. It's something that man can create. It's something that a human being, and only a human being, can create with the intellect that God has given us. We can take the items that exist already in this world and we can make them bigger, better, greater. We can elevate them. That's what fire symbolizes. That's why it comes after the very first Shabbat. It's not the same as the 6 days of creation. The 6 days of creation, God created something from nothing. But on that Motzei Shabbat, Adam said, human beings can take two things that already exist, and we can make something entirely new from it. We can make a fire out of those stones. You know, we're reading now about the slavery in Egypt, okay? And I saw there's a beautiful insight by Rabbi Lopiansky. He's the Rosh Yeshiva, the head of the yeshiva in Maryland in America. And he said the following thing. I don't know if you ever thought about this, but I've never ever thought about this, even though I'm embarrassed to say I've studied this so many times and never thought of this question. He says the following: if you read about the Exodus, then the theme, what we talk about all of the time, whether it's Seder night, whether it's the Psukim in the Torah, we speak about God took us out from slavery. What's the very first of the Ten Commandments? Anochi Hashem, I am Hashem your God. Asher Hotzeticha, who took you out, mibeit avadim, from the house of slavery. God took us out of slavery, right? From slavery to freedom. He says, one minute. The Egyptians didn't just enslave us. The Egyptians persecuted us. Paro used to bathe in the blood of Jewish children. There was infanticide going, they were killing Jewish babies. Why isn't that mentioned? It's all about slavery. Why doesn't it mention something much worse than slavery? Persecution. God took us out. He saved our lives from the people who were persecuting the Jews. Why is it all about slavery? And he says something very, very fundamental. He says there's two words in Judaism for work, for labor. One is melacha, like we use on Shabbos. On Shabbat, there are 39 categories of forbidden work, 39 melachot. But the other is avodah, slavery. And melacha has got a purpose to it. Melacha is a creative, purposeful act. In fact, on Shabbos, if you do something destructive, even if it's something you're not allowed to do on Shabbat, but you do it for no purpose other than to destroy something, then you're actually not breaking Shabbat in the Torah sense, at least. So melacha is constructive work, but avodah, servitude, slavery, is work which is purposeless. A slave does what his master says, even if he doesn't understand why, even if it makes no sense, even if it's got no purpose at all. God says, you know what I did? I took you out from a life with no purpose. Mibeit avadim, from a house of slavery where you had no purpose at all. I took you and I gave you a purpose. I made you into a nation and I gave you the Torah, which is the instructions for the entire world. It's the universal code which we have to uplift and to elevate the entire world. And that's the greatest thing about the Exodus. That is the fundamental change that took place with the Exodus. We went from being people with no purpose to a people with a goal, with a purpose, and with a meaning. One story. I saw this recently, actually on the Aish website. There's a lady called, I can't pronounce her name exactly, but Riha is the name. It's a German name. Riha Sokolov, her name is. I may be pronouncing that wrong, so I apologize to her. Anyway, Riha, she was writing this article about how she had just donated her birth certificate to the National Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. And there it was displayed in a case. Okay, interesting. Why would they want her birth certificate? So it turns out that she was born in Berlin, Germany, January the 19th, 1943. She's got a German birth certificate which says that she is Jewish. She's of the Mosaic faith, and both of her parents are Jewish as well. On her German birth certificate issued in 1943, Berlin, Germany. And she goes on to tell her story. She says her parents were both laborers, which meant that you were one step away from going to a concentration camp and to death. And every time they left their house, they didn't know whether they would return. I can't imagine what it must have felt like to be a Jew in Berlin. But there were still Jews clearly living in Berlin. But they were living in fear of their lives, not knowing what was going to be the next day. And she said that despite this, despite not knowing whether every day on this world was their last, she says her mother had a strong desire to have a child. And she says the only explanation that she has is that her mother embraced spiritual resistance, just like our ancestors did in Egypt during the time of their slavery. Her parents wanted to have a child, despite everything else that was going on. And she said that that became their goal. Their goal was that they were going to have another child or a child. They were going to bring a Jewish life into the world. And when the child was born, 3 days afterwards, the father went to get a birth certificate. He went to the embassy, which was obviously run by the Nazis. And he told them that he was Jewish and that his wife was Jewish and that the baby was Jewish and he wanted a birth certificate for their Jewish baby. It's just mind-boggling. And she says, you know why he did it? Because there was one thing that her parents were more terrified of than anything else, which was that they would be taken away and they would be killed. And there would be no record of who this baby was or that the baby was Jewish. And that someone would find this baby, bring them up, and the baby would never, ever know that they were Jewish. And they wanted to bring a Jewish child into the world more than anything else. So the father went and he registered the birth, that the parents were Jewish and the child was Jewish. Soon afterwards, the second part of their plan was to escape Berlin. Once they'd had the baby, they managed to escape. They went into the village. They were hidden by a lady who they actually later on met, who was one of the righteous amongst the Gentiles who protected them, and she was saved. And Ria grew up now to have her own family, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren of her own, all because her mother and father, in the most impossible of circumstances, they had a goal. They were going to bring a Jewish child into the world. And look what they did. They managed, despite everything, they managed to complete that goal, and that she would retain her Jewish identity. So just to summarize, because I can see that we've got to the end of our time. Just to summarize, we said, firstly, that having a goal, there's a lot of challenges that we've got at the moment, but having a goal, having a purpose is something that can really, really make a difference. Firstly, in the general sense, having a purpose means that whatever we're doing, we look at it completely differently. Remember the cleaner in the NASA, in the NASA Space Center, who says he's sending someone to the moon. It means we can see the opportunities in the things. We can grab those opportunities with both hands that we have. And Judaism specifically can give us that purpose, because there's nothing, just like if we don't have a purpose, if all we're doing is following other people that have no purpose, then we've also got no purpose in life. And we need a purpose which is such a good purpose that it's even something which is more important than life itself. It's got to be something it would be worth giving up our lives for, if it's truly going to be the purpose to life. And we said that Judaism gives us that purpose. We explained that firstly, the purpose of the creation. The purpose, when God creates man, he gives us the ability to create things, to take the world that he has made and to elevate them, just like Adam did on that very first Motzei Shabbat, after Shabbat finished, where he made fire for the very first time. We can't be God, but rather we can take the world that we have and we can create and we can elevate it. And ultimately, we said that was the purpose of the Exodus. The whole reason we left Egypt is because a slave doesn't have his own purpose. God came, take us out of Egypt, gives us the instruction book of the Torah, gives us a purpose. That purpose being to bring spirituality into this world, first into our lives, and by bringing it into our lives and ultimately bringing it into the entire world, connection to God. And then we told the story of an example of what purpose can do. Of someone who has a goal, these young parents in Berlin, Germany, managed to bring up and to register the birth of their Jewish child who grew up to have her own Jewish family, all because they were determined enough. And they had a goal. They wanted to make sure that they could bring this child into the world. She would grow up as a Jewish girl, which she did. So what we've got to do, I think, if we want to overcome the challenges, if we want to stay positive, we want to stay happy during the lockdown, and not just that, just to come out and feel like we've actually gained something. You know, we're all going to look back at this pandemic. Please God, we'll be able to look back at this pandemic. And we're going to talk about it for years to come. And we're going to tell, whether it's children or grandchildren, it's going to be a big event, a huge event. We want to come out with it. We want to say we gained something from the experience. There'll be lots of stories to tell, but will there be anything that we can say about ourselves from this? Or will it just be something that kind of hit us and we kind of survived and that was all we can say about it? So there are lots of different things that we can do. We spoke about a few of them before, but examples of ways to bring that purpose into our lives. And specifically that purpose that Judaism gives us. The first thing is to set aside some time for learning. We've got more time, so let's set aside some time. Real growth takes knowledge and it takes time. I can guarantee you there is no field in the entire world in which you can actually succeed and really grow and thrive without two things, which is knowledge and also time. So let's set aside some time on a regular basis while we can. Set aside some time, get into a good habit to set aside some time for learning. And then when we do that, that knowledge will help us to grow. And the other thing is to focus on mitzvot, practical things, practical spirituality, right? That's what we were doing previously. Practical spirituality means bringing those mitzvot into our home. We've got so much home time at the moment. It's ideal. It's like on a plate for us. So whether it's Shabbat, upgrading the Shabbat, as we've spoken about, we've talked about in the past, Jewish marriage, what does a Jewish marriage mean? What does it look like? What are the laws? What can it do for my life? What can it do for my marriage? All these different areas, maybe now God's giving us an opportunity to focus on ways in which we can bring practically Judaism into our home lives when we've got that focus anyway on our lives at home. Thank you very much for listening. I'm done. If anyone needs to leave, then they can do. And if anyone wants to ask any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer.
Can I ask a question, Rabbi? When the Jews left Egypt, did they know what their purpose was? Do you think that they were going to get the Torah and they were going to go to Mount Sinai? Did they know that?
Good question. So the answer is that right at the beginning, I don't have a chumash here with me, but right at the beginning in Parashas Shemos already, we have the 4 statements which are given, where Hashem says, this is why we drink the 4 cups, right? There are 4 different statements of redemption, which God says, and which are then told to the people by Moshe. And the 4th of those statements is, V'lakachti eschem li la'am. I'm going to take you and make you a nation. And Rashi says the explanation given with that, which Moshe is explaining, would have explained to the people, what does this mean? It means when I take you to Har Sinai and you receive the Torah. Because the Jewish people, it was never a sort of just a national, let's be a nation like all the other nations. It was always about coming close to God, and that was what it was going to be. So it was explained right at the beginning by the burning bush. Moshe says to God, what do you mean you're going to save these people? What have they done that merits being saved? What makes them any better than anyone else? Okay, they're slaves, but they, like you're saying, they didn't have God in their lives at that time. And God says, he answers Moshe, when they come out, I'm going to go give them the Torah. That when they come out, they're going straight to Mount Sinai. So the Jewish people knew it, they were told it, but it took them time to sort of live up to those expectations. And by the way, that's why they get some of the mitzvot before they leave, yeah? There were some of the mitzvot that were given to us before we even leave Egypt, because they were preparations so that we would be able to then actually hear the whole story later on at Mount Sinai. But yeah, they already had that purpose.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah, Viktor Frankl, Dov, his view was it wasn't religious though, right? He said whatever the meaning is. But it has to be. What was the saying you said? I was writing notes. If you don't know what you're willing to die for, what was the last part?
Then if you don't know what you're willing to die for, then you haven't begun to live. That was Rabbi Noach Weinberg, not Viktor Frankl, but yeah.
Oh, okay.
So Viktor Frankl himself is an interesting thing. Did he believe in God? Did he not believe in God? He talks about God, by the way. And if you've read his book, you'll see he does mention God. It is talked about, as is spirituality. Actually, in preparation for this class, I saw an interview that was conducted with him when he was 90 years old. And the interviewer asked him this question. In fact, by the way, a lot of the reason why people don't now his work is actually extremely well accepted in all circles. Positive psychology now is really much, much more accepted than the Freudian psychology. It's a whole different, and that's the CBT that you've probably heard of. Like these types of sort of coaching and therapy is all based on positive psychology, which really he was kind of one of the fathers of that sort of movement, moving away from the Freudian type of psychology that said, that we're all governed by these base desires. His was like no, every person is good and every person is searching for meaning. But this interviewer asked him actually if the ultimate meaning is God, and that's what he meant to say. And he very neatly sidesteps the question. And he basically says that it can be different things, and he doesn't think it's relevant to the discussion what his personal beliefs are. And he specifically did not want to include his personal beliefs, and always remained very careful not to sort of make them public, because he said he didn't want people to denigrate his work because of it. It would be written off as, oh, he's religious, and that's what he means, right? But I was thinking to myself, regardless of whether he himself, and so I can't tell you yes or no in terms of him himself. It's not fair for me to speak for him if he didn't say himself. But regardless of whether he himself meant spirituality in terms of God or some other super meaning, whatever that might be, to life, it's clear that in Judaism, we've got that meaning. Whether he knew that or knew what it was or accepted it or not, who knows? But it's clear that as Jewish people, we do have that. We have that meaning to life. And we'll get to when we get to the last talk about how we know that God really exists and what the proof is for it. And if so, why are we only a minority among the nations, right? We've got logical pathways to the belief and to the understanding and the knowledge of God, that God exists. And therefore, we are in the most incredible position to be able to have what he would call super meaning in our lives, which is truly something that transcends life itself, meaning that transcends life itself. Yeah.
So you never, I think you categorize. So the purpose of the Jewish people is to become closer to God, or the purpose of Jewish people is to be ambassadors for Hashem, or?
In a sentence, the purpose of the Jewish people is to take the physical world and to elevate it so it becomes closer to God. We do that by elevating firstly ourselves. And sometimes it ends there. Sometimes it's just ourselves and our family and our closest, and that's it. Fine, okay, that might be all we do. But whether we know or not, whether we do it consciously or not, by doing so, then we are influencing others, both in terms of because of what we're doing in the spiritual world, in terms of what other people see about us. So we're elevating the world, just like Adam Arishan, just like Adam. He takes the tools that God has given him and he makes fire out of those. He can't make something from nothing, but he can take the world and he can elevate it. He can make something much bigger out of it. So similarly, that's what we can do as human beings, as Jewish people as well.